Parents kicked me out after donating kidney to their golden child, now wants me to house them. So, growing up, I always knew my place in the family. My half-brother was the golden child, and I was, well, the extra. You know, the one there to fill in when needed, but not really important otherwise. It wasn't like anyone ever said it out loud, but actions speak louder, right? Every little thing he needed, it was like the world had to stop. If he wanted help with homework, I had to put down whatever I was doing. If he wanted a snack, guess who was making it? Yep, me. It wasn't just small stuff, though. It was my whole life being shaped around what he needed or wanted. Every decision in the house seemed to revolve around him. It was like living in someone else's shadow, except I wasn't even allowed to step into the light for a second. One memory that sticks out is when we were kids. Maybe I was around 10 or so. I had this school project I was really excited about. It was one of those science fair things where you build a volcano or whatever. I spent weeks planning it, making sure everything was perfect. The night before the big day, my brother came down with a cold. Not like anything serious, just the sniffles. But my dad? Oh man, you'd think the world was ending. He canceled everything to take care of him. I begged to go to the fair, but nope. Family comes first, they said. By family, they meant my brother. That was just one example. There were a million others. Every birthday party I had was overshadowed by his needs. Every holiday, every trip, it was always about him. I remember once we were planning a family vacation, something I'd been looking forward to for months. I had saved up my allowance, dreaming about all the cool stuff we'd do. Then, just days before, my brother decided he didn't want to go. Guess what? Trip canceled. No discussion, no compromise, just, we need to make sure he's comfortable. It wasn't like he was this terrible person either. He was just used to being the center of attention. My dad and stepmom made sure of that. They would go on and on about how special he was, how he needed all this extra care. Me? I was just there to pick up the slack. It got to a point where I didn't even bother asking for things. What was the point? If it didn't benefit my brother, it wasn't happening. Now don't get me wrong. I get that sometimes kids need extra help or attention, but this wasn't sometimes. This was every single day. I couldn't even remember a time when I felt like I mattered as much as him. It was like I was the backup plan, the spare in case something went wrong with the main attraction. Even school was affected. I was a decent student, nothing amazing, but I tried. I had dreams of going to college, doing something with my life. But my dad had other plans. Anytime my brother needed help with school, guess who was tutoring him? And if I ever needed help, well, tough luck. Figure it out yourself. There was this one time I got a pretty bad grade on a test. I came home feeling terrible and hoped maybe, just maybe, someone would care. Instead, my dad gave me a lecture about how I needed to work harder. But the second my brother got a C on his report card, full-on intervention, tutors, extra study time, everything, it was infuriating. What made it worse was the constant reminder that family sticks together. That line was drilled into my head from the time I could walk. But what they really meant was, I had to stick with them. They didn't owe me the same. It was all about what I could do for the family, specifically my brother. And then there were the little things, the subtle digs that added up over time. Like how my dad would praise my brother for the smallest achievements, but barely acknowledge anything I did. If my brother cleaned his room, it was a celebration. If I aced a test, a nod maybe. It was those small moments that chipped away at me, made me realize I wasn't ever going to be enough in their eyes. I think what hurt the most was how normalized it all became. I started to believe that maybe I wasn't worth as much. Maybe I wasn't supposed to have my own dreams or goals. Maybe my purpose was just to be there for my brother, to make sure he had everything he needed. It was exhausting. Looking back, I wish I had stood up for myself more. But it's hard when you're a kid, and everyone around you is telling you that this is just how things are. I didn't have the words or the confidence to push back. I just accepted it, swallowed my feelings, and kept going. It wasn't until I got older that I started to see the cracks in the facade. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how messed up it was. I mean, no kid should have to grow up feeling like they're second place in their own family. But by the time I figured that out, the damage was done. I had already spent years putting my own needs on hold, all for the sake of family. But yeah, that was my life. Always in the background, always expected to give and never ask for anything in return. And honestly, it shaped a lot of who I am today. Not in a good way, but I'll get into that later. For now, just know that growing up as the other kid in a family that only had eyes for my brother, it was rough, and it left scars I'm still dealing with. It all started when my half-brother got sick. Not just a regular flu or something minor, but really sick. The kind of sick where doctors start throwing around scary words, and suddenly, it feels like the world is crashing down. I remember the day they told us he needed a kidney transplant. My dad and stepmom were freaking out, pacing around the room, trying to figure out what to do. The doctors explained that dialysis was only a temporary solution and that finding a donor was critical. And that's when all eyes turned to me. I didn't even get a chance to process what was happening before they started talking about testing family members. The doctors mentioned how it's common for siblings to be a match, and before I could even think, my dad was already nodding along like it was a done deal. "Michael, you'll get tested, right?" My dad said, like it wasn't even a question, like it was just expected. What was I supposed to say? No? Of course, I couldn't say no. It wasn't just the pressure from my dad, it was the whole family thing drilled into my head for years. Family sticks together, right? So I agreed. I mean, what else could I do? The testing process was long and honestly, pretty invasive. Blood tests, tissue matching, all sorts of stuff I didn't fully understand at the time. I was just going through the motions, not really thinking about what it all meant. Then came the day the results came back, and surprise, I was a perfect match. Everyone was relieved. My dad hugged me for what felt like the first time in years. My stepmom cried, thanking me over and over. It was overwhelming. I should have felt good about it, right? Like I was doing this huge, selfless thing for my brother. But deep down, I was terrified. The surgery was scheduled quickly. They didn't want to waste any time. The days leading up to it were a blur of hospital visits, paperwork, and awkward family dinners where no one really knew what to say. My brother was quiet, probably scared too, but he never really said much to me about it. It was like we both knew what needed to be done, so we just went along with it. The day of the surgery came faster than I expected. I remember lying on that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that everything was going to be fine. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to change everything. And it did. Just not in the way I thought. The surgery itself went as planned. They took one of my kidneys and gave it to my brother. The doctor said everything looked good, and both of us were expected to recover well. I spent a few days in the hospital, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, but I was relieved it was over. I thought maybe now things would be different. Maybe I'd earned some sort of respect or appreciation from my family. But no. The moment I got home, reality hit hard. My dad and stepmom were so focused on my brother's recovery that I became invisible again. They barely acknowledged what I'd done. It was all about him, how he was feeling, what he needed. I was left to recover on my own, physically and emotionally drained, without so much as a thank you. One night, about a week after the surgery, I tried bringing it up. I told my dad I was struggling, that I was in pain and needed help. His response? "You'll be fine. Your brother needs us more right now." That sentence stuck with me. It was like a slap in the face. I had just given up a part of myself, literally, and still, it wasn't enough. My needs didn't matter. They never did. The worst part? It wasn't just physical recovery. The emotional toll was brutal. I started to feel like I didn't matter at all, like my only purpose in the family was to be there when they needed something. Once I'd served that purpose, I was discarded. My brother eventually got better. He was back on his feet attending follow-up appointments and getting back to his life. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces of mine. I tried talking to friends about it, but it's hard to explain the kind of emptiness you feel when your own family treats you like a tool rather than a person. I kept thinking about all the sacrifices I'd made over the years, giving up my time, my dreams, and now a literal piece of my body. And for what? To be cast aside the second I wasn't useful anymore? I wish I could say that was the turning point where I stood up for myself, but it wasn't. I just kept going, putting one foot in front of the other, trying to convince myself that maybe one day they'd see me for more than just the backup. But that day never came. And one day my brother had a very bad day, and I started helping even though I was feeling bad, but instead of getting a bit of support, or even a thank you, I got kicked out. My dad and stepmom decided they needed to focus on my brother's recovery, which apparently didn't include me being around. I still remember that conversation. It wasn't even a conversation, really. My dad just came up to me one day, probably 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, and said, "You need to find somewhere else to stay." That was it. No explanation beyond, "Your brother needs peace and quiet." It wasn't like I was causing a ruckus. I was still recovering myself, barely able to get out of bed most days, without feeling like I was going to collapse. So I packed up what little I had. I didn't have anywhere to go, no savings, no backup plan. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch. Shout out to Dave, by the way. He really saved my ass back then. But even staying there felt like I was overstaying my welcome after a while. Dave had his own life, and here I was, this half-broken guy trying to piece things together. Finding work was tough. I wasn't in any shape to do much physical labor, and most jobs I could get were demanding on the body. But I had to do something, so I started picking up shifts at a local diner. The pay wasn't great and the hours were long, but it was something. At least I could contribute to the rent and buy some food. The hardest part, though, wasn't the physical stuff. It was the mental toll. I felt completely abandoned. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out what I did wrong. Why wasn't I enough? Why did my dad and stepmom think it was okay to just toss me aside like that? Every now and then, I'd hear about them through the grapevine. Mutual friends, neighbors, random people who still kept in touch. My brother was doing fine, of course. He was back at college, living his life like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I was busting my ass just to keep a roof over my head and food in my stomach. On top of that, my health was a mess. The surgery had left me with anemia, and some days, it was hard just to get out of bed. I dragged myself to work, pushed through the shifts, and then collapsed back at Dave's place. There were times I felt like giving up, but I couldn't. I didn't really have that option. No one else was going to pick up the pieces for me. One night I was walking home from a late shift. It was freezing, and I didn't have a proper jacket. I remember thinking how ironic it was. Here I was, struggling to stay warm and fed, while my family was probably cozy at home, not giving me a second thought. That walk home hit me hard. It made me realize just how alone I really was. I tried reaching out to my dad a few times, hoping maybe he'd come around. I'd text him, letting him know how I was doing, asking if we could talk. But I'd either get ignored or get some short, cold response. Hope you're doing well, or busy with your brother? That was it. It was like I didn't even exist to them anymore. Dave would try to cheer me up, telling me I didn't need them, that I could make it on my own, and I appreciated it, I really did. But it's hard to shake that feeling of being unwanted by your own family. It's like this constant weight on your chest, reminding you that you weren't good enough. One of the worst moments came a few months in. I was at work, trying to stay focused, when I got a call from a mutual friend. They mentioned how my dad and stepmom were throwing a party for my brother, celebrating his recovery and his return to school. I wasn't invited, of course. That hurt. Not that I expected an invite, but hearing about it made everything sting all over again. I went home that night and just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I gave up a part of myself for them, and they couldn't even spare a thought for me. That's when I decided I needed to stop trying to reach out. It was clear they had made their choice and I wasn't part of it. The next few months were a blur of work and exhaustion. I kept pushing forward, trying to build something for myself. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of nights I barely made it through. But slowly, I started to accept that I was on my own. Looking back, I think those months were some of the toughest of my life. I felt like I was constantly fighting just to keep my head above water, and the people who should have been there for me were nowhere to be found. It was a harsh lesson, but one I needed to learn. Struggling alone wasn't what I wanted, but it taught me a lot about resilience. I learned that I couldn't rely on anyone else, that if I wanted a better life, I had to make it happen myself. And while it was a painful process, it also made me stronger. It had been years since I heard from my dad. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to hear from him ever again. After everything that happened, getting kicked out, being left to fend for myself, I figured we were done. But then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed, and there it was. A message from my dad. "Hey, can we talk? It's important." At first I thought it might be a mistake. Maybe he meant to text someone else. I mean, why would he want to talk now? But curiosity got the better of me and I replied, "Sure, what's up?" He responded quickly, asking if we could meet in person. That was a bit of a shock. I hadn't seen him since the day he told me to pack my stuff and leave. My gut was telling me not to go, but something in me needed to know what he wanted. We agreed to meet at a small cafe not far from where I worked. I got there a bit early, nerves kicking in. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would he apologize? Would he try to guilt trip me into something? My mind was racing with all the possibilities. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked older, more tired. It was like life had taken a toll on him. He sat down across from me, and for a moment, there was this awkward silence. Neither of us knew how to start. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about things. About you." That caught me off guard. I wasn't used to him talking about me, at least not in a way that suggested he cared. "I know I haven't been there for you," he continued, "but things have been hard, and I need your help." There it was, the real reason for the meeting. I could feel my guard going up. I knew better than to let my guard down too quickly. "What kind of help?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He sighed, looking down at the table. I'm in a bit of a situation. We're struggling to keep up with the mortgage. My health's not great, and I can't work like I used to. We've got debts piling up, and we need a place to stay. I sat there, processing what he was saying. After everything they put me through, after tossing me aside like I was nothing, now he was asking for my help? It felt surreal. You want to move in with me? I asked, trying to wrap my head around it. He nodded. Just for a little while, until we can get back on our feet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those years of struggling alone, and now he wanted to come back into my life because he needed something from me. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Why now? I finally asked. Why come to me after all this time? He hesitated, then said, We tried asking your brother, but his fiancée wasn't on board. We didn't have anywhere else to turn. That hit me like a punch to the gut. So, I was the last resort. Not the first choice, not even the second. Just the backup plan, like always. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the situation. Part of me wanted to tell him exactly where he could go, but another part of me couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He looked desperate, and despite everything, there was still that tiny sliver of hope in me that maybe, just maybe, this could be a chance to mend things. But then I remembered all the nights I spent struggling alone, all the times I reached out, hoping for some acknowledgement, some support, and got nothing in return. I couldn't just forget that. I don't know, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You kicked me out when I needed you the most. Now you're asking me to take you in? It's a lot to process. He nodded like he understood. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you, but I'm trying to make things right. I'm asking for a chance. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But trust isn't something that just magically appears. It has to be earned, and he had a lot of ground to cover. I'll think about it, I finally said. But I need time. He nodded again, looking a little relieved. That's all I'm asking for. We sat there for a few more minutes, talking about nothing in particular. It was awkward, like two strangers trying to find some common ground. When we finally parted ways, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was angry, part of me was sad, and part of me was just confused. I spent the next few days thinking about that conversation. I replayed it over and over in my head, trying to figure out what to do. On one hand, he was my dad, and a part of me still wanted to help. But on the other hand, I couldn't ignore all the pain he'd caused me. In the end, I knew I had a tough decision to make. And whatever I chose, it wasn't going to be easy. After our cafe meeting, I thought I'd have some time to breathe and think things through. But nope, my dad didn't give me much of a break. A couple of days later, my phone started blowing up with texts. At first, it was just simple messages like, "Have you thought about what we talked about?" Or, "We really need your help." I ignored them, hoping he'd back off, but that wasn't happening. The next day, he called. I let it go to voicemail because honestly, I wasn't ready for another conversation. But then, I listened to the message, and it was him, sounding all serious. "Michael, it's your dad. I know you're busy, but this is important. Please call me back." I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't at least hear him out, he'd just keep pushing. So, I called him back, and right away, I knew this wasn't going to be a quick chat. "Michael," he said, "I didn't want to bother you, but I've been thinking about our last conversation. I need to explain a few things." Here we go, I thought. Okay, I'm listening. He started with the whole family speech. You know the one, how family sticks together, how we're supposed to help each other in tough times. It was the same stuff I'd heard my whole life, but now it felt different, like he was using it as a weapon. "Your mom would have wanted you to help," he said, throwing that in there like a low blow. "She believed in family and taking care of each other. I know she'd be proud of you for stepping up." That hit hard. My mom had passed away when I was younger, and bringing her into this felt like a cheap shot. He knew I loved her, and he was using that to guilt me. I stayed quiet, trying to process what he was saying without letting it get to me. "I know I wasn't perfect," he continued. "I made mistakes, but we're family, Michael. And family forgives. Family helps each other." I could feel the pressure building. He was laying it on thick, and I knew exactly what he was doing. It wasn't about making amends or fixing our relationship. It was about getting what he wanted, me to take them in and fix their mess. "Dad, I get what you're saying," I finally said. "But you have to understand, this isn't easy for me. You can't just expect me to forget everything and pretend like it's all okay." He sighed, like he was disappointed in my response. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to put the past behind us and focus on what's important now." Then he dropped another bomb. "Your brother won't do it. He's got his own life, his own problems. But you've always been the responsible one. You've always been the one we could count on. There it was, the ultimate guilt trip. My brother, the golden child, was off the hook because he had his own life, but I was expected to pick up the pieces because I was the responsible one. It was the same story, just a different chapter. Dad, I've been responsible my whole life, I said, my voice shaking a little. I've sacrificed so much already. I gave up a part of myself for this family, and what did I get in return? I got kicked out. I know, he said, his voice softening. And I'm sorry for that. I really am. But we're in a tough spot, Michael. I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious. I wanted to scream, to tell him how unfair it was to put this on me. But instead I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I need time to think, I said, hoping it would buy me some space. Take your time, he said, but I could hear the urgency in his voice. Just remember what your mom would have wanted. That line stuck with me long after the call ended. I couldn't believe he had used my mom's memory to guilt me into helping. It was like he knew exactly where to hit to make me feel the worst. And the worst part? It was working. I was torn between wanting to stand my ground and not wanting to let my mom down, even if she wasn't here to see it. Over the next few days, I replayed the conversation in my head over and over. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened. The guilt was eating away at me, making it hard to focus on anything else. I knew what he was doing, but it didn't make it any easier to ignore. I talked to a few close friends about it, trying to get their perspective. They all said the same thing. You don't owe him anything. After everything he put you through, he's the one who should be apologizing, not asking for favors. They were right, of course. But knowing it and feeling it were two different things. Every time I thought about saying no, that little voice in my head would remind me of what my dad said about my mom. It was like a tug of war between my head and my heart. In the end, I knew I had to make a decision. But whatever I chose, I knew there'd be no going back. A few days after our last call, my dad reached out again. This time, he wasn't just texting or leaving voicemails. He showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting him, so when I opened the door and saw him standing there, I was caught off guard. He looked worse than before. Tired, worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. Michael, we need to talk, he said, his voice shaky. I hesitated for a second, but stepped aside and let him in. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy. I could tell this wasn't going to be a casual chat. I know I've been pushing you, he started, his hands fidgeting in his lap. And I'm sorry for that, but things have gotten worse. We're running out of options. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. I wanted to hear what he had to say, even though I already had a good idea of where this was going. We've tried everything, he continued. We've sold what we could, cut back on expenses, but it's not enough. We're going to lose the house. Hearing him say that was tough. As much as I had distanced myself from them, it still hurt to think of my dad losing the place we called home for so many years. But I couldn't ignore everything that had happened. It wasn't as simple as just opening my door and letting them in. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, he went on. And you're right. We didn't treat you the way we should have. I didn't treat you the way I should have. That caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting an apology, especially not one that seemed so genuine. I let you down, he said, his voice cracking. I was so focused on your brother that I forgot about you, and I've regretted it every day since. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe him, to accept the apology and move forward. But another part of me was still holding on to all the pain and resentment. I'm sorry, he repeated, his eyes welling up with tears. I know I can't change the past, but I'm asking for your help now because we have nowhere else to turn. Then, something I never expected happened. My dad broke down, full-on tears, sobbing into his hands. I'd never seen him like that before. He was always the strong, stoic type, the guy who kept his emotions in check. Seeing him like this was jarring. I don't know what else to do, he said through the tears. I've always tried to be strong, to hold everything together, but I can't do it anymore. I need help, Michael. I need your help. It was hard to watch. This man, who I had always seen as unshakable, was falling apart right in front of me. It stirred something inside me, this mix of sadness, anger, and a deep, aching sympathy. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my own voice shaky. This is a lot. I know, he said, wiping his face. And I know I have no right to ask after everything, but I'm desperate. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. I could feel the conflict tearing me apart inside. On one hand, he was my dad, and seeing him like this was breaking my heart. But on the other hand, I couldn't just forget all the times he had let me down. I need to think about this, I finally said, breaking the silence. I can't give you an answer right now. He nodded, his eyes still red from crying. I understand, just please don't take too long. We don't have much time. After he left, I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying everything in my head. Seeing my dad like that, so vulnerable, had shaken me. It was like all the walls I had built around myself were starting to crumble. But no matter how much I wanted to help, I couldn't ignore the past. I couldn't just pretend that everything was okay. This wasn't just about finding a place for them to stay. It was about years of pain and neglect that couldn't be swept under the rug. I knew I had a decision to make, and whatever I chose, it would change everything. The days following my dad's breakdown were some of the hardest I've ever had. Every time I tried to focus on work or anything else, my mind would drift back to that moment. Seeing him cry, hearing the desperation in his voice, it was all on repeat in my head. I knew I couldn't avoid making a decision forever, but that didn't make it any easier. I thought about all the times I'd been there for them, all the sacrifices I'd made, giving up my kidney, getting kicked out, struggling on my own while they focused on my brother. Every memory felt like a punch to the gut. How could they expect me to just forget all that? One night, as I was lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about something my dad had said. We have nowhere else to turn. The words kept bouncing around in my head. A part of me felt guilty, like maybe I was being too harsh. But then, another part of me reminded me of all the nights I spent alone, fighting to survive while they didn't seem to care. I decided I needed to talk to him again, face to face. Avoiding him wasn't going to solve anything, and I had to get everything off my chest. So I called him up and asked if he could meet me at the same cafe. He agreed, sounding relieved, like he thought this might be the turning point. When I got there, he was already waiting. He looked tired, probably hadn't slept much since our last meeting. I sat down, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The weight of what was about to be discussed hung heavy in the air. Dad, I started, I've been thinking a lot about everything. He nodded, waiting for me to continue. I know you're in a tough spot, and I get why you're asking for my help, I said, but I need you to understand where I'm coming from. His eyes met mine, and I could see the worry in them. I'm listening, he said quietly. I took a deep breath. You made a lot of choices that hurt me. When I needed you the most, you weren't there. You chose them over me, every single time. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I'm sorry for that. I'm not saying this to hurt you, I continued, but you have to understand why this is so hard for me. I've spent years trying to move past everything, trying to build a life for myself despite everything that happened. And now you're asking me to bring all that back into my life. I didn't know what else to do, he admitted. I've been trying to fix things, but it's not easy. I get that, I said. But you have to understand that it's not easy for me either. I've been through hell and back, and it's taken everything I have to get to where I am now. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us lost in our thoughts. I don't want to say no, I finally said, but I have to be honest with you, I can't do this. I can't let you and her move in with me. He looked like he'd been hit with a ton of bricks. Michael, please, he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. I need to protect myself, I said firmly. I've spent too much of my life putting everyone else first, sacrificing my own well-being for others. I can't keep doing that. But we're family, he said, his voice breaking. Isn't that supposed to mean something? It does, I said. But family isn't just about what you're born into. It's about how you treat each other. And for too long, I felt like I wasn't really a part of this family. He lowered his head, clearly struggling to process what I was saying. I never meant to make you feel that way, he whispered. I know, I said. But intention doesn't erase the impact. I've carried the weight of those choices for years, and I can't carry it anymore. He nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes. I don't know what we're going to do, he admitted. But I understand where you're coming from. I hope you can figure something out, I said. I really do. But I can't be the solution this time. We sat there for a while longer, not saying much. There wasn't much else to say. The decision had been made, and now we both had to live with it. When we finally got up to leave, he gave me a long, heavy look. Thank you for being honest, he said. I wish things were different. Me too, I replied. And with that, we went our separate ways. Walking away from that conversation, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a lingering guilt. But deep down, I knew I had made the right choice. It wasn't easy, but sometimes doing what's right for yourself means making the hardest decisions.